Okay, so here it is, the Pavo Pico V2. And it's kind of crazy to think that the original Pico dropped maybe 2 years ago to the date. Time does fly. So let's open this up and see what you get. All right, so first thing here is a bag with some spare propellers, a connector for the flight controller, and a spare like screwdriver. Then we have another bag here with some gummies on here, and these special grommets on here to make this whole thing here work. Pretty important bag, and we'll talk about this when we install the canopy to the drone. Talking about canopies, here's the first of 2 canopies, and this one here is for the 04 Air Unit Pro. Now this one here looks identical to the canopy on the Pavo 20 Pro 04, as you can see right here. We'll take a closer look at it later on and see if that's true once we install the 04 Pro on the Pico V2. Next we have the actual Pico V2 itself. And then next we have the second canopy, and this one here is for the 04 Lite. Now this looks very similar to the one on the Pavo Femto. It looks very similar, but it is different. And the big thing here is the mount for the camera and some other stuff here underneath, and we'll talk about that once we install this as well. So last but not least, we have a QR code here to go to the website and download the manual if you want to see that as well. All right, so let's take a closer look at the Pavo Pico V2. And I have the original right here for some comparison, and they are very, very similar. First of all, I do want to weigh the two and see how much they weigh and use it as a reference. I'm sure they're very similar in weight. And let's weigh the original, the V1, and see how much that weighs. 33.09 grams. And the V2, 39.3, so 6 grams more. Now the V2 here is a little bit heavier than the original, but the overall weight will be a little bit lighter compared to the actual V1, and that's due to the air unit and the actual canopy. Now the heavier weight comes from this redesigned frame here. As you can see, there's more carbon fiber in the actual frame compared to the V1. Besides that, most of the other parts here are identical. You still have the same XT30 connector on here. Now the flight controller here is very similar to the V1. This is a F45 flight controller with 20 amp ESCs, more than adequate for a drone of this size. Now connected to the flight controller and ESC is the prop and motor combination. Now they look very similar. They're both the same size. These are 1102 14,000 kV, so they are the same size. But the big difference here is that this is an original version of that motor and this is a version 2. This is actually the lava version of that motor. Although it's the same size, guys, if you look at this, and it's gonna be hard to see in camera, the magnets are incredibly bigger on the lava series. So you're gonna have a lot more power and torque from this size motor right here. I do suspect that's where some of the weight is coming from, in addition to the frame here. One more thing I have to mention, guys, is the prop orientation. And notice that the props are a little bit different. On the original V1, props are props out, and then with the new version here, props are going in. So they may have gotten some better flight characteristics with the props going in. Besides that, you still have your same harness here for your digital VTX. We're talking about DJI VTXs, the 03, 04, and the 04 Lite. Same thing that we saw here in the Pavo Pico, the V1 here. And since we're talking about, we'll just address it right now. The original Pavo Pico did come with the 03, or was compatible for 03 air unit. At the time, 04 was not a thing. And believe it or not, the 03 is a bit heavier than the 04 air unit. So that's the reason why this one here was heavier. Now with the Pavo Pico V2, we do have the two canopies, one for the 04 Pro and the original 04. Now I do have these two VTX in my other beta FPV drones. We do have the 04 Lite in my Femto, and then we have the 04 Pro in the Pavo 20 Pro. So I do think this is the same canopy, and because of that, this should be pretty easy to install. We'll just remove this and install it on here since the canopies are identical. Well, they look that way. And we'll test the Pavo Pico V2 with both VTX. It should be pretty interesting. Now, having said that, guys, Beta FPV does understand that these are two dramatic differences in weights here. So we do have two different pin tunes for this drone, one for the 04 Lite and one for the 04 Pro. So we'll try to see what the differences are here. Now, since we're talking about VTXs and the two options for this new drone, let's talk about the kind of star of the show here, the highlight of the Pavo Pico V2. They've gone away from these little grommets right here, or even these little balls in the Femto, to a new, I guess kind of same grommets. And the whole idea is that the whole canopy is gonna sit on the grommets and be kind of free floating to absorb all the vibrations. So we'll see if that works out. Beta FPV says they've worked a lot of hours intensively to try to make that as smooth as possible, and we'll see if that works out. Besides that, there's really no other difference on here. We still have the XD30 connector on here. You have the plug here to actually interface with the Betaflight software. Now the battery tray under here is very similar. We're still using a 2S battery. We do have the 550 2S battery here. This is the lava battery. Now they say that you can actually put larger batteries in here as well. And just like any other Pavo series of drone, you can actually just snip these two pieces out of here and put a strap to actually secure the battery to the actual frame. I wish they did that from the factory, but I do think they want you to fly with the 550 2S batteries, and we'll see how long the flight times are. Now, talking about that, they said the flight times have been dramatically improved. We're getting at least over 6 minutes of flight time with the V2 Pico here. And that's a big deal, guys. This one I think was around 4 minutes or so. 2 extra minutes, it's pretty impressive. Now, Beta FPV has a pretty good instruction video how to install both canopies to the actual V2 on here. And you pretty much just slide this in the grooves. There you go. There's no more like fishing the screw through it. And this thing just sits on top of it. I'll do that quickly, take a look at it, and then let you know my impressions before I fly it and see how secure or how long it took me to install this. Okay, so we have our 04 Lite installed on our Pavo Pico V2. Now, it wasn't too hard. It did take me maybe 10-15 minutes or so. And the big thing here is just trying to find my original housing for this actual camera here, and then figuring out which screw to use for the actual camera. Now, there's 2 screws here. They're M2 screws, but I did use the self tap-in screws for the side right here, the camera on here. And then you also have some additional one here that could be used for the 04. Now, my 04 is already installed in the canopy for the Pavo 20 Pro 04. So I just took it out, and as you can see, they are identical. So I'm not even gonna transfer this 04 Pro to this Pico 2 canopy. Another difficult part here is just the actual grommets, these little rubber gummies on here. Now this thing looks really nice. It does seem like it is gonna absorb all the vibration in here. And besides that, it was straightforward, very, very similar to the one on the Pavo Femto. So I don't think the Pavo Femto is gonna work. Obviously the housing is different for the actual camera, but as you can see, these are the 2 drones. The Femto is obviously a little bit smaller of a drone than the Pico. Now, having said that, let's weigh this now that we have the actual canopy, 04 air unit, and the camera on here. And we're looking at 54.1 grams. Not too bad. This is a pretty stout kind of drone. So I'm just gonna power this on. I'm gonna bind this to my radio, go to the Betaflight settings on here, make sure that it's the right settings here for the 04 Lite, and then take it for a flight. Okay, so we're back from our flight test, and the Pavo Pico V2 did a pretty good job. Now, I have to preface this by saying that the weather for the past couple of days actually the entire week has been pretty bad. We're talking about winds between 15 and 20 miles an hour. Really not the best condition to test the drone, but even from the morning to the afternoon, it's just been windy the entire day. Now, having said that, the Pico V2 did a pretty good job considering the very adverse conditions. Now, this thing did perform very well. I'm not gonna say that this thing was not influenced by the wind, and you can clearly see that in my video as I'm flying straight. You see a little bit of a bank as I'm going in a straight line. So the winds were kind of affecting this drone here overall, but these things do have ducts on there, and it's just the nature of the design of these drones and just the strong winds for a drone of this size. Now, I did start off here with the 04 Lite, and this thing had more than adequate thrust to fly around and go pretty fast. It is significantly faster than the Pico V1 that I have right here. And that kind of makes sense because the actual V1 is a little bit heavier than the V2 with the 04 Lite. Now, using the 04 Lite, I was able to do some light acro maneuvers, and this thing did a pretty good job, especially compared to the V1 right here. Now, this is not an acro beast by any means, but you can do a quick flip or flop, maybe do a nice extended dive, and they handle it pretty well as you saw in the video. So for light acro maneuvers, the 04 Lite is pretty good. Now, one thing I forgot to mention about the Pico V2 is just the motor and prop combination here. This thing does emit a very high-pitched squeal. It is very loud, and just the high frequency nature of it makes it kind of annoying, and it does kind of carry a far ways away. So if you're looking for a kind of quiet, discreet drone, I do think just because of the small nature of these props, it does have a high-pitched noise. That leads me to the 04 A-Unit Pro, and this one here is obviously a little bit heavier, and because of that added weight, the motors were actually even louder. So just consider that when you're flying this drone. Now, besides that, yes, I could feel the weight difference immediately. Now, one thing I have to mention is that Beta FPV does have a separate profile for the 04 Pro versus the Lite, and you can easily get into that menu using your stick commands and the OSD menu on your screen. Now, the flight characteristics on the 04 Pro is pretty good, guys. It flew very similar to the 04 Lite, just with some minor tweaks on here. This thing, obviously you can feel the weight on it. So when you're doing some acro maneuvers, some flips rolls, especially a power loop or a long extended dive, you do have to get on the throttle a lot earlier. And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about the battery life, because I did have to use a lot more throttle just to fly this thing, especially in the weather conditions that I was flying with this week. But besides that, the 04 Pro did a pretty good job, guys. The best way to explain this drone is almost like a hybrid between the Pavo Femto and the Pavo 20 Pro. Now, it does have the same kind of speed and maneuverability like the Femto here. This is a good flying drone, but not the fastest, but still the characteristics of the 04 Pro. This was probably one of their best flying drones that they offer, the Pavo 20 Pro. So obviously not as powerful. These are bigger motors with bigger propellers on here. This thing can keep up with a lot of fast moving objects. So this is kind of like the sweet spot between those two drones. All right, let's talk about the image quality of the Pavo Pico V2. And obviously the best part of this whole drone here is the ability to use the 04 Pro and the 04 Lite. Let's start with the 04 Lite. This is my first time flying with this. And this thing actually interfaces very well with the drone. You have these 4 grommets, little dampers on here. And surprisingly, it works very well. I would say this is a lot better design and significantly better than the one on the Femto with those small little suspended gummies on here. So this is a pretty cool design. It does interface very well with the actual frame. There's no tools required to actually install this onto the frame. You just gotta hook these in the holes and you're good to go. It takes like 3 to 4 minutes, if even that. The image quality obviously is the 04 Lite. The field of view is a little bit smaller than the 04 Pro. And obviously we do have stabilization in here. Now, I did use the gyroflow software to stabilize this, and the image was very, very smooth, guys. No issues. So these grommets here are pretty good. Now, I do have really good adjustability here on the camera on here. It is well protected, and you can get a lot of tilt out of this setup right here, guys. So you can go really fast or slow, depending on your environment and what you're trying to capture here. So with the 04 Lite, really no issues at all. It's just this. Really, really compact. Now let's move on to the 04 Pro, and this is the one I'm more interested about. And this one here obviously is significant. I now can confirm that the canopy for the Pavo Pico V2 with the 04 Pro is the same as the Pavo 20 Pro 04. Hence the reason why I just took it off this drone and just put it on the Pavo Pico. So they do have different mounting holes on here. It's not the same as the one for the Lite. This one does require some tools to actually secure it to the frame. I do wish that they had the same kind of features where you can just take it off and transfer it in the field. But this thing did capture a really good image. Obviously 04 Pro, you have higher resolution, higher bit rates, better color, even a flat profile, and the wider field of view. So this is significantly better, guys. The stabilization on this is pretty good. Now, I did fly this drone here with the 04 Pro initially with the 04 Lite profile, and I did get some vibrations in there. I was like, okay, that doesn't look too well, and I forgot I had to switch the profile using the stick commands, and all the vibration went away once I swapped that over. It is significantly heavier. As you can see on my drone right here, I am rocking the original DJI antennas on here. It is a little bit heavier than the one that came with the Pavo Pico V2, but I do get better range and penetration with these antennas right here, which is what you want. If you can get away with that loud screeching noise of the propellers, then the 04 Pro is my preferred way of flying this Pico V2, guys. I don't think you'll be disappointed at all. The image is just spectacular. Now that leads us into the battery life, and obviously we have two different canopies on here. Now I did fly the Pico V2 with two batteries, obviously the recommended 550 milliamp hour battery, as well as the 450, a little bit lighter. This was used on some other drones, and they both fit into the battery tray very, very well, actually, guys, very, very well. Let's start off with the 04 Lite here. I think Beta FB says you can get around 6.5 minutes of flight time, but I was averaging around 5 minutes, around 5 minutes to 5:15 seconds of flight time. Now, I have to reiterate that the conditions I was finding was pretty bad, guys. We're talking about 20, sometimes gusting to 25 miles an hour, just continuous the entire day. It got to the point sometimes where I was using around 50 to 60% of throttle just to move forward into the wind. So that would definitely eat into the battery. And I do suspect that if you had more or better flying conditions, you'd have a lot more flight time, maybe 30 or 40 more seconds than what I experienced with this drone right here. Now, if you think about it, the actual V1 Pico got around 4 minutes of flight time, but in actuality was around 3.5 minutes. So to go from 3.5 minutes to around 5 minutes is a big or a huge improvement, guys. And that's just over a few years, maybe a year and a half. So not too bad overall, guys. Now with the 04 Pro, this thing here is obviously heavier. I did get a reduction in flight time. So instead of getting 5 minutes, I was getting around 4 minutes, sometimes around 3.5 minutes. So it is a little bit less with this heavier canopy and camera setup right here. So battery life on the Pico V2 is significantly better than the one on the actual V1 here. I did have some adverse conditions, but your mileage may vary depending on the performance of your battery, as well as the environmental condition that you're flying in. All right, last but not least, let's talk about the durability of the Pavo Pico V2. Now, I did crash this drone a few times, guys, and this thing looks pretty good overall. No broken ducts. The canopy is good. Both the canopies are good. No broken propellers. I didn't have any issues with the Pico V1 either here, but the Pico V2 does look a little bit sturdier. But yeah, this thing is pretty good. I did crash the heck out of this. Now, I have to say, guys, I did have a pretty violent crash on one of my flights, very violent, to the point where I thought I pretty much damaged my 04 Air Unit Pro. And pretty much I got camera error. It was a freak accident, guys. You know, it was still windy. I kind of hit the ground, and the damn drone just accelerated and went straight into a pole. I thought the camera was done. I thought I broke the lens on here. Thank God I didn't. But I got the drone back, and the drone looked pretty good. No cracks, nothing. So the canopy on here did a pretty good job. Now, my camera didn't work. I had to come back to the office here and just dismantle the entire thing. Took apart the camera, unplugged the MIPI cable, took a look, and then reassembled it, and it fired back up. But just trying to do a reset did not work, guys. As far as the durability, yes, I took a hit so violent that it did kind of like shut down the camera air unit, but the drone itself held up pretty well. I don't foresee this thing being damaged by any means, but I think it did a pretty good job as far as durability is concerned. Okay, so overall, what do I think about the Pavo Pico V2? Well, I do think that Beta FB has a win on their hands. This is the actual drone that started it all. Now every manufacturer has a small drone like this of their own. Even Beta FB has multiple drones of this size with 04 Pro and 04 Lite. But this thing here is a winner. It is a great improvement over the version 1. We have better flight times, we have more performance, and then you have the ability to swap between the 04 Pro and the 04 Lite. I do think that is the secret sauce and the game changer of this drone. Some of the other drones in the market just sticks to just one type of VTX, but to have two right here, and they actually include both canopies on here, really impressive. And I think it's kind of the sleeper of the bunch here. Pretty impressive overall. And I think Beta FB has figured out the kind of right recipe to make a small, tiny whoop. They've been doing this for some years now, and they've kind of perfected it right here in the Pico V2. Now this thing flies just like any of their Pavo series of drones, and I think the biggest question is, where does this fit, and is this the right one for you? And as you can see right here, we have a series of their drones. As I said before, they've been doing this for a while. Do I go for the Pavo Pico V1, the Femto, which is actually smaller than the two actual Picos here, and then the Pico V2 as well as the Pavo 20 Pro 04. The decision is yours, guys. This thing here flies very well. And if you want some more performance, guys, you might want to look into the Pavo 20 Pro 04. Now, this one here does not have the ability to carry the 04 Lite. It does fit the same 04 Pro canopy that we saw here in the Pico V2 right here. Now, if you're interested in the Pavo 20 Pro 04, I've done a full review on this one here, and spoiler alert, this one here is my favorite drone of the bunch here. I've done a full review and I'll leave it linked right here so you can take a look at it. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.